Hi, and welcome to White Glove Trucking, the channel dedicated to helping you use trucking as a vehicle to live your best life. I'm EJ Anderson, the congressional auditor turned long haul truck blogger, also known as the happiest, kindest trucker on the road. Okay, now this video is all about how to truck smarter. Okay, I'm gonna give you 3 ideas for trucking smarter so you can make a little bit more money. Now, I got these from this book written by this poker player, famous poker player named Annie Duke. The name of the book, the title of the book is called Quit. And but there are some great little nuggets in here that we can apply to trucking. Okay, so the very first one is I'll call a better way of knowing when to work and when to shut it down for the day. Okay, now Annie in her book, she looked at a study done on New York City taxi drivers, right? They found that instead of driving longer on the good days when the taxi fares were high, the drivers stopped early. And on the days when the fares were low, the drivers worked longer, trying to make up a certain amount of money they had in their mind they wanted to make for the day. So this was the absolute worst way to do it, and we truckers do the exact same thing. I know a lot of truckers try to make a certain amount for the month. And I remember during COVID, during a real hot market with COVID, I watched a presentation done by one of the guys over at ATBS, and he was so confused. He was like, man, this is a dream market, rates as high as they've ever been. But he was finding in his data that truckers were driving less. And it's because people had a amount for the month, different than cab drivers. Cab drivers are by the day, but for us truckers, it's by the month. But people had that amount for the month that they were trying to get. And once they got it, they just stopped. When really, when rates are that high, they should have been going. And when the rates are lower, they should be driving less. Now, this is how we can learn from this. The researchers found that because drivers are so bad at knowing when to stop and when to keep going, they ended up earning 15 to 20% less than they could have. And here's the thing. Even if they had just driven a consistent amount of time every day, not even thinking about the market or what they were trying to get for the day, then they would have earned 8 to 10% more simply by removing their poor decision making and any kind of emotions out of the equation, right? So we truckers are the same way. So instead of trying to get a certain amount for the month, if you just pick a certain amount of miles or a certain amount of days that you want to drive that feels good, consistent, sustainable, you will probably make more money than if you're trying to hit a certain number for the month, especially if that means you're stopping early when you get it early or continuing to drive hard when you're not getting it. You're working harder, not smarter when you do it that way. So the bottom line for this is drive more when rates are high and less when they're low. I know that sounds obvious, but it's a little bit counterintuitive based on what the research shows. And then secondly, even if you don't do it that optimal way, even if you just picked a set standard number of days or miles you want to drive for the month, you probably would make more than you would trying to hit that fixed number. Okay, so the second lesson I learned from this book, I'll call it verify the decision you didn't make. Annie Duke says most people don't go back and look at the decisions they didn't make. Basically going back to look at what would have happened if you had made a different choice. And as truckers, this is costing us money. And I'll admit, this is one I'm guilty of because I don't want to go back and look at the choice I didn't make for fear of seeing that I missed out on something, right? But that thinking and letting that emotional fear is holding me back from learning and making the best decision going forward and making the most money going forward. So now here's 2 ways we can do this when choosing our loads. Number 1 is timing. So if you book a load early, or let's say you're debating between booking a load early or waiting and booking a later load, trying to get a better paying load kind of late. If you end up booking that load early, then go back later and look at what it would have been if you had booked it last second. And you can see, over time, you'll be able to see, well, should I have waited? Or maybe I made the best decision because there were no loads available last second. But at least you're looking back on it and you're learning from the decisions you make. The second way to do it is location, same thing. If you decide between 2 different cities to go to, you got 2 different loads, you're comparing them, check out check out the loads, what they're paying in the city you didn't go to, versus the loads in the city you did go to. And so that's a way to look back on that decision and verify. I haven't looked at the data on this, but I can tell you sort of like a feel of it. Every single time I have had a load canceled, I seem to get a better load, which really is telling me that it would be better to wait till later to book the loads. But like I said, I don't have the data on that. I have to do the research and collect some data for a little while to be absolutely sure. But just my feel from driving, I think that's what it is. Okay, so this last one is called Beware of Escalation of Commitment and Sunk Cost. Now, the last big lesson from Annie Duke's book, Quit, is something she calls escalation of commitment, or it's kind of known as sunk cost. In simplest terms, it's when we keep throwing money, time, or energy at something just because we've already invested so much in it. It's kind of that little voice that says, oh, I can't stop now because I've come too far. I've done too much already. Okay, now I've got 2 examples of this in trucking. Let's do the sunk cost first. So my sunk cost example is if you buy a used truck and over time it starts needing repairs. Each time you tell yourself, well, I fixed so much already, I might as well fix this next part, this next little piece. And before you know it, you've spent more on the truck than it's worth. That's escalation of commitment. That's sunk cost you put in, that cost that you put in that you'll never get back. That's keeping you from making the decision to move on to a better option, a newer truck that will actually be more profitable going forward. I like the way Annie describes something in here. She says, the decision to not make a decision is a decision to stick with the current thing, the status quo. If you say, I'm not ready to decide yet, you're basically saying, I'm deciding to keep things the way that they are. So instead of saying, I don't want to make that decision yet, if you were to say, I think the status quo is the best decision for right now. And then if that doesn't feel right, then you know that fear or habit or something like that is kind of keeping you from making the decision you really need to make. Okay, now I want to use one more example for the escalation of commitment. It's a simple thing, but it happens all the time. So you're on the highway and you get into the lane and it's going to end. But instead of just getting back over, you kind of floor it to try to get in front of those cars to try to get over before it ends. So it's like you made one kind of poor decision, and then because you had already done it, you make another poor decision. So that's like escalation of commitment. So it's just something to think about. That's an example of it in real world on the highway. We see it all the time. Well, guys, that's it. I just read that book. I took those 3 lessons from it, and I thought, damn, these are real good lessons for trucking. So I just wanted to share them with you guys. I hope you get something out of this one, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.